Alright, it's Wednesday and I'm super happy to announce that we have bushings and we have a couple flanges and we have the beginning of our stack. That is 5 inches. So first thing we're going to do is get these bushings pressed in, and then we're going to throw the front suspension back on the truck because we're pretty much done up there besides for the shocks. Okay, it's raining super loud in here, so I apologize if you have trouble hearing me, but I've got the bushing set into the control arm, and I've got 2 pieces of pipe. This one is going to offset the control arm from the press here. And I'm going to use this one to start pressing it in. I'm going to press it in a little bit because I don't have enough clearance, and then I'm going to throw a plate on top. I got both of the smaller bushings pressed in without much hassle. The bigger ones, I'm going to have a little bit more of a challenge because my pipe that I'm using as a press doesn't sit on the rim or the lip of the bushing. So I am going to attempt just pressing it from the centerpiece here, which you're not supposed to do. But I am going to roll the dice. Let's see what happens. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to push in the larger bushings on the press because I basically just can't get the arm in there far enough to push the bushing down straight on. So it looks like we're going to have to resort to probably a hammer. Let's see what happens. Alright, I was just joking about the hammer thing, but I have rigged up a real ghetto press here using my vise. Got a piece of stainless tubing that just manages to fit around the outside on this one, and I've got an inner race from the NV 4500 rebuild that I did. I'm kind of pressing the bushing in on this side, so I kind of already gave it a little torque, and I thought I saw it move, but let's find out what happens here. Twist it a couple more times. Worked, and that's all we really needed. So the front suspension is back in. I'm going to hold off on putting the airbags in because I'm expecting some shock mounts today or tomorrow, and I'm going to mock up I'm going to for sure weld in the lower shock mount on the control arm so I can get that out of the way because I know exactly where it's going to go. And then I'm going to kind of mock up where the upper shock mount I think will go. And then I'll take a measurement, order my shocks, and finalize everything there. And hopefully we'll be done with the front end. So it's not really much to look at, but you know, all new components, and it should hopefully not have to come apart again. So I got the lug nuts for the wheels, and I also got the bags installed, and I rigged up some airlines so that I could operate the airbag and get an idea of our ride height. And this is basically what it's going to look like on the ground. I decided that probably keep the bumper off the ground with like some kickstands closer to the frame. but this is what it'll look like aired up. So the first thing on my checklist today is the top shock mounts. I've basically taken a piece of scrap steel and tack welded it onto my shock mount. And what we're gonna do with it is just tack weld it onto the frame at a height we think we're gonna want. Kind of like that. And then we'll just slam the chassis and take a measurement, raise it all the way up, take a measurement, and put it at ride height and take a measurement, and we should have a pretty good idea of what length shock we'll need. So first thing I'm gonna do is cover the airbag real good with some material that will resist sparks and such, just in case a tack weld spark flies down there. Don't want to pop the bag. Got a nice heavy thick material laid over the bag here, so I'm gonna take a grinder with sanding disc and just clean off that area right there so I can get a nice strong tack weld to hold the shock mount. I got the chassis aired out after I welded on the top shock mount, and first thing I'm gonna do is take a measurement from each eyelet to eyelet, which you could see is the top. The bottom's down there on the control arm, so we'll just shoot a tape measure from here to there, and it looks like about 7 inches collapsed. So now what we'll do is we'll air it up to ride height and take a measurement there, and then we'll air it up as high as it'll go, or as high as we want it to go, and take a measurement there, and then we can order some shocks. All right, now we're at ride height. Tie rods are approximately level, sloping downwards maybe 2 or 3 degrees. So we'll just get another measurement real quick. At ride height, we're looking at about 13 1/4. Yeah, about 13 1/4. Let's fill it up the rest of the way and then take our last measurement and then start searching the interwebs. Okay, that should be pretty close. Yeah, it's definitely close. We'll call it 15. Spoke with Q1A and they basically informed me, or I think it's QA1, sorry, anyways, they basically informed me that to get the amount of stroke that I'm gonna need for an air ride suspension setup, I'm gonna have to go with a much larger shock than what my measurements at ride height, aired out, and extended come out to be. So they recommended a shock to me that has like almost 11 5/8 minimum travel. So we're gonna go ahead and reposition the shock mounts to accommodate for that, and we're just gonna basically make sure it clears the control arm, and put it right about in that location. And then we're gonna go ahead and air it up and see if the shock will clear the airbag. So let's get started. Got the measurement pretty close to 11 5/8 from upper to lower. And now we're gonna air it up and see what we get for an extended ride height. So I just spent a good amount of time on the phone trying to figure out what I can do for the shocks. And for my specific application, since I'm keeping the truck at stock ride height, instead of lowering it like you would with a spring, I need to retain a long amount of shock travel, almost 4 inches of compression and 4 inches of rebound. So that's like a total shock travel of 8 inches, which is almost the length of a rear shock versus a front shock, but that shouldn't be an issue. So I did choose a shock that I'm gonna run with and got it ordered. So it should maybe hopefully be here tomorrow, and we can finish mocking up the shock mounts, but this will be our overall lowest height we can go with the shock that I ordered. It should be a 14-inch compressed height on the shock, and it'll go as high as 22 inches. So that'll give us enough wheel gap to be able to make a real sharp turn if we have to, fully aired up. And what I'm gonna do now is go ahead and get the lower shock mounts welded onto the control arms, or at least tacked on. And then hopefully the turbo parts I need are gonna show up here in about an hour or so, and we can transfer to start working on that. And so that'll make this our ride height. You can see the wheel or tire to fender gap is pretty minimal, which is how I wanted it. So it's looking pretty good. Now we're just waiting for the 90-degree elbow so we can get the other turbo flange made up. And until then, I guess it's break time. I went ahead and mounted the cab to make sure that everything is where it needs to be before I finalize anything else. And this is what it's gonna look like. I'm pretty happy with the way it came out, actually. There's enough clearance between the back of the cab and the motor to do whatever I need to do inside the timing case without removing the cab. And I like the ride height. Everything else looks really good, I think. So just gonna get that cab back off of there and then pull off the rest of the sheet metal. So the way I'm able to move this entire chassis by myself is I take a piece of pipe and use it in between the spokes of this wheel, and I'm able to make the entire thing move pretty easily. That's actually how I got it in here from the side of the shop. And the cab I just have hooked up to my gantry crane, just like when I dropped the engine in. So what I'm gonna do now is get the cab down, back on these dollies and out of the way, and then all right, now that the cab's out of the way, we can get the chassis back in here, and I'll probably end up removing the front sheet metal and taking out the airbag, but maybe not. I know it's not going to be in there when I weld in the shock mounts, so maybe I'll just wait until I get the shock to pull that out. But it's Saturday morning, and I'm not going to get my shocks actually this weekend after all, so I went ahead and made what is the same length as the shock, and I just took a piece of 1-inch tube, drilled a couple 1/2-inch holes in it, and it works pretty well for mocking up the shock mount points there. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my paper here, and I'm going to make a template that follows the frame all the way down onto the bag mount here. It kind of comes out and then maybe does a little 45 off this way to miss the bolt and the air fitting. And what that'll do is it'll add strength to the bag mount and also act as the upper shock mount perch. So basically we'll make one for this side, one for this side, and then make 2 more for the driver's side because it should be identical. So first step is we're gonna make our paper template and then test fit it on both sides. Here's our template. As you can see, we notched it 3/8 for the change in surface level from adding the plate, and basically just notched it for the frame rail. Same thing that I do with all my templates. And now all I have to do is take a pencil and mark through the hole here, and I'll get my placement for the eyelet, and then we just duplicate this on steel. Here's the finished paper template. As you can see, I left some clearance in there just for all the movement, and got my center line marked, so it's time to cut a couple of these out of steel. Unfortunately, I've ran out of 3/16 sheet, so I have a piece of 1/4" sheet left, and I'm just gonna go ahead and make the shock mounts out of 1/4. So I've got all my templates traced on here, and I'm gonna fire up the plasma cutter and get them cut out. Some of you may remember me complaining about the crappiness of my cuts because of my unsteady hand. Well, it turns out that I was relying too much on these. This little guide, I call them training wheels now because I realize it's only really something you need on there in the beginning when you're trying to figure out how to run this thing. It's there to keep the tip a certain distance away from the plate, but when I take it off and kind of just use 2 hands and go real slow like I'm welding, I have a lot better luck. So that's what I'm gonna do this time, and I'll show you the difference. Go ahead and say maybe I had too much coffee this morning because a little shaky, but everything came out pretty nice. I got all 4 of them down here, and we'll just throw them on the grinder and the sander, and then we'll get a hole drilled and we'll get them welded on. Got the shock mounts all cleaned up. I'm pretty happy with the way they came out. These 2 I'm going to use on the driver's side, and I've got a couple over here mocked up on the passenger side just to make sure that the holes lined up, and it came out really good. So the next step is going to be, I guess we'll be removing this piece and getting these guys tack welded in. But first I'm going to pull out the airbag because we don't want any sparks hitting that guy. So I've got the first pair of shock mounts in, and I'm just about ready to weld them. Figured I'd give you a look at what it looks like before I did. I had to bend them in this direction to avoid the bolt holes and also the air fitting, so that's why that looks like that, but it should still add strength to the bag mount. So let's get it welded up. I got the lower mounts welded on, and I've got the uppers tacked on. I think I'm probably just gonna leave it that way until I get the shocks in on Thursday, because you know, I'd rather cut a couple tack welds, then have to cut an entire weld to change something. So I think I'm gonna call it good on the front suspension for now and just wait till Thursday.